You can give him the world. You can bend over backward. You can move mountains for him. And he won't notice, not because he's ungrateful, but because his loyalty isn't for you. It's for one thing, one single thing. And until you understand that, you'll be running in circles while he stands still. You see, loyalty isn't something you hand out like candy. It's not a reward for good behavior, a paycheck, or the number of favors you do for someone. Real loyalty, it's deep. It's ingrained. It's a part of a man's core, like the rhythm of his heartbeat, like the pull of the tide against the shore. You can try to mold it. You can try to bargain for it. But at the end of the day, loyalty doesn't respond to arguments or gestures. It responds to alignment, to the thing that he naturally values above everything else. And if you don't understand what that is, you'll spend your life giving and giving and giving, and it will never be enough. Think about it. You can move mountains for someone. You can sacrifice sleep, time, energy, and peace of mind. You can make their life comfortable. You can smooth every bump in their path, and still they won't blink. Not because they're cold, not because they're cruel, but because their loyalty isn't for the things you do. Their loyalty belongs somewhere else, somewhere deeper, somewhere unshakable. It's something you can't influence with good intentions or grand gestures. It's something that already exists inside them. It was there long before you walked into their life, and it will be there long after. You see, loyalty is tied to what a man believes in, not what he receives. It's connected to his principles, his goals, his purpose. It's a magnet that pulls him toward what matters most. And here's the thing, no amount of convincing can redirect that magnet if you aren't in line with it. You might think that doing more, giving more, loving more should make him more loyal to you, but it won't. Because loyalty isn't transactional. It isn't a ledger you fill with good deeds until it balances out. Loyalty is innate, it's instinctive, and it will always flow toward what he already holds sacred. When you start to understand this, you start to see patterns. You start to see the difference between those who are naturally devoted and those who are simply grateful for your effort. You start to see that the man who seems unmovable isn't unappreciative. It's just that the thing he's loyal to doesn't include you. And that's not a failure on your part. That's not a reflection of your worth. That's simply the law of nature. Loyalty doesn't bend. It doesn't shift. It doesn't expand for the sake of someone else's effort. It exists full and whole in one place, and nothing you do can rewrite it. Here's the challenge most people face. They mistake effort for influence. They believe that if they give enough, do enough, show enough love, then loyalty will follow. But effort and loyalty are two different things. One is external. One is internal. One you can control. The other, not at all. You can run yourself ragged trying to earn a man's loyalty. You can move mountains for him. You can sacrifice parts of yourself. And yet, if your values, your essence, your purpose don't align with what he's naturally drawn to, your efforts are invisible. They pass through him like water over stone. The stone doesn't change. The water just keeps flowing. So here's the truth you must hold on to. Loyalty cannot be manufactured. It cannot be purchased. And it cannot be borrowed. It is not given because of need or want. It exists because it chooses to exist. It is attracted to what it is meant to serve. And until you recognize that you will keep chasing something that cannot be caught, you will keep bending, sacrificing, pleading, and hoping, all the while wondering why your devotion doesn't matter. It's not about you. It's about understanding that real loyalty is innate. It lives inside a man, and it moves only toward what is already part of his soul. A man's direction is set long before anyone tries to change it. His compass doesn't spin because someone loves him harder, sacrifices more, or gives endlessly. It points where it points. And no matter how strong the wind, no matter how loud the voices around him, that needle stays steady. You can push, you can pull, you can plead. But direction is not decided by pressure. It's decided by purpose. And when you don't understand that, you mistake motion for progress. You think because you're moving, because you're doing, because you're exhausting yourself, that something must eventually change. But effort does not equal influence. Motion does not mean direction. You see, people assume that consistency will wear someone down, that if you show up enough times, prove yourself enough times, give enough pieces of yourself, then eventually the course will shift. But a man with a fixed compass doesn't drift. He doesn't wander. He doesn't accidentally end up somewhere new just because someone walked beside him long enough. His path is chosen internally. His steps follow something already decided. And when you place yourself in front of that path, hoping he'll turn, he won't. He'll walk right past you. Not out of malice, not out of disrespect, but because what drives him doesn't see obstacles, only destinations. This is where most people break themselves. They confuse effort with power. They believe effort has authority, that doing more gives them leverage. But effort has no power over direction. None. You can pour everything you have into someone, and they can still walk away without hesitation. Not because your effort was small, but because it was irrelevant to their compass. You weren't part of the map, and that truth hurts because we want to believe that love, loyalty, and sacrifice should matter enough to reroute someone's life. But the compass doesn't respond to emotion. It responds to identity. A man doesn't wake up every morning deciding who he'll be loyal to. He already knows. His actions follow that knowing. His choices orbit that center. And if your efforts don't serve that center, they become background noise. You can shout over it. You can cry into it. You can decorate it with good intentions. But it won't change course. That's why some people feel invisible no matter how present they are. They're standing outside the circle of what matters. And no amount of effort grants you entry into a space you were never meant to occupy. Here's the difficult part to accept. Trying harder often pushes you further away. Not because effort is bad, but because misplaced effort creates imbalance. When one person is bending, adjusting, and overextending, and the other is standing firm in their direction, the gap widens. And instead of pulling him toward you, your effort highlights how far apart you really are. You start losing yourself trying to move someone who was never meant to turn. And the tragedy isn't that he doesn't change. It's that you forget who you were before you tried. A compass doesn't argue. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't feel guilt. It simply points north. And when you understand that, you stop taking resistance personally. You stop interpreting silence as confusion and distance as indecision. You realize clarity was there the whole time. You just didn't want to read it. His lack of movement wasn't uncertainty. It was certainty. His stillness wasn't hesitation. It was commitment. And the sooner you recognize that your efforts won't shift a man's compass, the sooner you stop fighting reality and start seeing things exactly as they are. A man does not move by your measurements. He doesn't calculate his actions based on how much you gave, how much you endured, or how deeply you feel. He operates by an internal code, a private set of standards that define what matters and what doesn't. And once those standards are set, they become the filter through which he sees the world. You may call something unacceptable while he barely notices it. You may call something essential while he considers it optional. That difference isn't misunderstanding, it's hierarchy. His standards decide what rises to the top, and what falls to the bottom, no matter how loudly someone else disagrees. This is where frustration is born, because you expect fairness to be mutual, values to be shared, effort to be mirrored. You believe that what matters deeply to you should matter deeply to him as well. But expectation doesn't change standards. Standards aren't formed in conversation or compromise. They're built through experience, belief, and identity. A man doesn't adjust his standards to meet someone else's emotions. He acts in alignment with what he believes is right, necessary, or useful to his own life. And when your expectations clash with his standards will always win. You might think that pointing out your pain should shift his behavior, that explaining your perspective should alter his choices. But standards aren't influenced by explanation. They're revealed by action. A man will show you again and again what he prioritizes, not through promises, but through consistency. When he chooses something else over you repeatedly, he isn't confused. He isn't conflicted. He is simply acting in accordance with his internal rules. And no amount of emotional reasoning will override a standard that feels justified in his mind. This doesn't mean he lacks feeling. It means feeling does not outrank principle in his decision making. His standards tell him what deserves energy and what doesn't, what requires loyalty and what can be sacrificed. And when you fall outside those boundaries, you don't get special treatment. You get evaluated like everything else. That's why trying to appeal to emotion alone rarely works. Because emotion is temporary, but standards are permanent. And a man will always protect what aligns with his standards, even if it costs him relationships, comfort, or understanding. The mistake many people make is assuming that love should rewrite standards. That care should soften rules. That closeness should grant exceptions. But exceptions threaten identity, and a man guards his identity fiercely. His standards are how he stays consistent with who he believes himself to be. Change those standards, and you change him. And most men would rather lose connection than lose themselves. So when you push against his standards, you aren't just asking for flexibility, you're challenging his sense of self, and resistance is the natural response. Once you see this clearly, you stop personalizing his behavior. You stop asking, why am I not enough? And start asking, what does he value? You realize that his actions aren't a verdict on your worth. They're a reflection of his internal framework. His standards decide his behavior long before you enter the picture. And when you understand that, you gain clarity. Because clarity is power, and power begins the moment you stop trying to change someone's standards and start deciding whether you can live within them. Influence is often misunderstood. People think influence is about how much you give, how much you endure, how much you're willing to lose to prove your devotion. They believe sacrifice is a language everyone understands. But sacrifice, when it's not aligned, is silent. It goes unnoticed. It becomes background noise. True influence doesn't come from how much you suffer. It comes from how closely you stand to what already matters. When you align with a man's values, his purpose, his direction, you don't have to beg to be seen. You are seen naturally. Effort fades, but alignment speaks without words. Sacrifice without alignment is exhausting. It drains you because it demands constant output with no return. You give more hoping it will finally register, hoping it will tip the scale. But alignment doesn't require effort. It requires understanding. When you align with what drives him, your presence reinforces his identity instead of challenging it. You become familiar, not demanding, supportive, not disruptive. And in that space, influence grows quietly. Not because you asked for it, but because you fit, because you belong where he's already going. A man does not feel influenced when he feels pressured. Pressure signals opposition. It tells him someone is trying to redirect him, reshape him, or slow him down, and instinctively he resists. But alignment feels different. Alignment feels like reinforcement. It feels like momentum, not friction. It feels like someone walking beside him, not pulling at his arm. That's why influence born from alignment lasts, while influence born from sacrifice collapses the moment you stop giving. One is sustainable. The other is a debt that keeps growing. People often believe that sacrificing enough will eventually earn alignment. But alignment isn't a reward. It's a prerequisite. You don't bleed your way into someone's vision. You either share it or you don't. And when you don't, your sacrifices feel misplaced, even to the person receiving them. They create discomfort, not connection. Because deep down, he knows you're giving something he never asked for, trying to secure a place that can't be negotiated. Alignment removes that tension. It allows influence to exist without guilt, obligation, or imbalance. When alignment is present, you don't have to announce your value. You don't have to explain your intentions. Your actions make sense within his world. They support his direction instead of competing with it. And because they make sense, they are welcomed. This is why some people seem effortlessly influential. They're not trying harder. They're standing in the right place. They're aligned with the flow instead of fighting against it. Influence, in that case, isn't forceful. It's natural. The hardest truth is realizing that sacrifice can make you smaller while alignment makes you stronger. Sacrifice says, I will change myself to be accepted. Alignment says, I already belong here. One erodes self-worth and the other reinforces. And a man responds to strength, not depletion. He responds to clarity, not exhaustion. When you align with what matters to him, influence follows without struggle. But when you sacrifice without alignment, you lose yourself trying to gain ground that was never meant to be yours. A man's focus is not a suggestion. It's a commitment. When he locks in on something, it becomes the center of his attention, the axis around which everything else rotates. And the mistake many people make is trying to pull that focus toward themselves, believing attention is proof of importance. But focus doesn't work that way. Focus is chosen. It's guarded. It's protected. And when you compete with it, you don't become more important. You become a distraction. And distractions are removed, not rewarded. Trying to compete with a man's focus puts you in opposition to what gives him direction. You start measuring yourself against his priorities, asking why they matter more than you do. But focus isn't about comparison. It's about purpose. He isn't choosing one thing over another emotionally. He's choosing based on function. What moves him forward stays in focus. What slows him down gets pushed aside. And when you demand attention from someone who is focused, you're asking him to violate his own discipline. That's not connection. That's conflict. Respecting his focus doesn't mean diminishing yourself. It means understanding the difference between partnership and interference. A focused man doesn't want someone standing in front of him asking to be seen. He wants someone who sees where he's going, someone who understands the weight of what he's carrying. When you respect his focus, you don't interrupt his rhythm. You complement it. You create space instead of tension. And in that space, trust grows, because nothing earns respect faster than someone who doesn't demand it. Competition creates noise. It introduces insecurity, comparison, and power struggles where none were necessary. Instead of asking how you can fit into his life, you start asking how to replace what already exists in it. And that never ends well, because focus isn't emotional, it's intentional. He doesn't wake up undecided about it. He wakes up committed. And when someone challenges that commitment, It signals incompatibility, not passion. Respecting focus keeps you aligned with his direction rather than positioned against it. There's strength in understanding when not to interfere. Strength in knowing when presence matters more than pressure. A man notices who brings clarity into his life and who brings chaos. He notices who makes his focus easier to maintain and who constantly pulls him away from it. Respect doesn't come from being loud, it comes from being steady. And the person who respects his focus becomes associated with peace, not resistance. That association is powerful. It shapes how he feels when you enter the room, even if he never says it out loud. When you stop competing with his focus, you reclaim your dignity. You stop shrinking yourself into an option fighting for attention. You stop measuring your worth against his priorities. Instead, you stand firm in who you are, allowing him to meet you without pressure. And whether he does or not, you remain whole. Because competing with focus drains you, but respecting it preserves you. And a man may not always say it, but he never forgets the difference between someone who fought his direction and someone who understood it. The moment you start trying to be valued, you begin giving away your power. Because value is not something you chase, it's something you carry. And when you forget that, you start negotiating your worth in small, quiet ways. You explain yourself when you shouldn't. You tolerate what drains you. You stay where you're unseen, hoping presence will turn into appreciation. But self-worth doesn't grow in environments where you have to prove it. It erodes there. And the more you try to be valued by someone else, the less you honor the value you already possess. A man can sense when someone doesn't value themselves, not because they say it out loud, but because their behavior speaks for them. Over-giving, over-explaining, over-accommodating. These aren't signs of love, they're signs of imbalance. When you place someone else's approval above your own self-respect, you silently teach them how to treat you. You teach them that your boundaries are flexible, that your needs are optional, that your presence is negotiable. And once that lesson is learned, it's rarely unlearned. Trying to be valued keeps you stuck in reaction mode. You adjust yourself to fit his moods. You monitor his responses. You wait for signs, for validation, for reassurance that you matter. And in that waiting, you shrink because you're no longer acting from strength. You're responding from fear. Fear of losing him, fear of not being enough, fear of being replaced. But fear is not attractive and it's not sustainable. A man doesn't rise to meet insecurity. He grows comfortable inside it. Valuing yourself changes the dynamic completely. When you value yourself, you don't chase clarity, you require it. You don't beg for effort. You notice consistency. You don't cling to attention, you observe intention. Your standards rise not as punishment, but as protection. And that shift is subtle but powerful. Because now you're not asking to be chosen, you're choosing. You're not hoping he sees your worth. You're deciding whether his behavior aligns with it. And that kind of self-assurance doesn't need announcement, it's felt. There's a difference between wanting connection and needing validation. One comes from abundance, the other comes from lack. When you value yourself, you approach relationships from fullness, not emptiness. You give because you want to, not because you're trying to secure a place. You stay because it makes sense, not because you're afraid to leave. And that freedom changes how people respond to you, not because they suddenly become better, but because you stop accepting less. The truth is, no one can value you more than you value yourself. They can only reflect what you already believe. If you treat yourself as optional, others will too. If you stay where you're diminished, others will assume that's what you deserve. But when you stand firm in your worth, when you walk away from what doesn't honor you, when you refuse to shrink for acceptance, you send a clear message without words, without confrontation, that your value is not up for negotiation. So understand this and understand it clearly. A man's loyalty is not shaped by how much you give, how deeply you feel, or how hard you try. It is shaped by what he already stands for. You cannot outwork his nature. You cannot outlove his direction. You cannot sacrifice your way into his loyalty. The sooner you stop trying to earn what was never yours to earn, the sooner you reclaim your strength. Stop chasing what doesn't move toward you. Stop competing with purpose that isn't aligned with yours. Stop bending yourself into smaller versions just to be noticed by someone who was never looking your way. Your power was never in convincing him. It was in choosing yourself before you lost yourself. When you stand in your worth, clarity follows. When you respect direction, peace follows. And when you stop forcing loyalty, you make room for the kind that doesn't need to be questioned, negotiated, or proven. Because the strongest position you will ever hold is the moment you stop asking to be chosen and start choosing yourself.